The wooden stake, driven deep into the manicured turf of his own lawn, was an affront. It was cheap pine, splintered at the top from the force of the mallet, and wrapped with a garish band of fluorescent orange surveyor's tape that fluttered in the late afternoon breeze. It was planted a full 15 feet inside his property line, a violent orange punctuation mark in the serene green sentence of his yard. Mark Hollis, an architect who lived by the precision of 1/1000th of an inch, felt the violation in his bones. This was not a misplaced flag for a utility line. This was a declaration. He was standing over it, the blades of grass cool against his ankles, when the voice, as crisp and unwelcome as a winter frost, cut across the driveway. "Ah, Mr. Hollis, I see you found the marker." Eleanor Vance, president of the Oak Creek Preserve Homeowners Association, stood on the sidewalk, hands clasped behind her back in a posture of regal authority. She was a woman, assembled from sharp angles and muted colors, her beige pantsuit blending with the uniform taupe of the neighborhood's approved color palette. Only her ambition was vibrant. "Eleanor," Mark said, keeping his tone level, "there seems to be a mistake. Someone's put a survey stake in the middle of my yard." Eleanor's smile was a thin, practiced curve that did not reach her eyes. "No mistake at all. That's the boundary for the new community walking path. The landscaping crew will be starting next week." She gestured with a dismissive wave toward the far side of his lawn, where a simple, elegant garden bench sat beneath the shade of a mature pin oak. "You'll need to have that bench removed. Of course. It's obstructing the common area easement." The words seemed to hang in the air, buzzing like hornets. The bench wasn't just a bench. His grandfather, a carpenter with hands as gnarled and strong as the oak he worked, had built it from reclaimed timber the year Mark was born. It was where his grandfather had taught him to read, where he and his wife, Sarah, had sat on the evening they closed on the house, and where he still went to feel a connection to the man who had bequeathed him not just a home, but a legacy. "That bench is on my private property." "Eleanor," Mark said, the words coming out low and deliberate, "this entire section of lawn is my property. I have the county survey to prove it." Eleanor produced a small, triumphant laugh. "Oh, the county's records can be so muddled. The HOA's governing documents, however, are quite clear. Our original plat map designates a 15-foot utility and access easement along all property lines bordering the commons. The board has voted to improve that easement for the enjoyment of the entire community." She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a confidential, condescending whisper. "It's for the greater good. Mark, you understand." He didn't understand. He understood blueprints, property deeds, and the indelible lines of the law. He understood that the bench his grandfather had built was a monument, and Eleanor Vance had just declared her intention to bulldoze it in the name of a beige, 2-foot-wide concrete path. The stake wasn't just a piece of wood. It was the first shovelful of dirt on his family's history. Mark's house was the one anomaly in Oak Creek Preserve, while the other homes were variations on a handful of developer-approved models. His was a custom design from the 1960s, a modest but thoughtfully crafted brick ranch that his grandfather had designed and built himself. When Mark inherited it 5 years ago, he and Sarah had lovingly restored it, preserving the mid-century character while updating its systems. For Mark, the house was a living blueprint, a testament to enduring design and personal history. It was his anchor in a world of transient trends. That evening, the official survey map was spread across their dining room table, its crisp lines and legal descriptions illuminated by the warm glow of the overhead light. Sarah traced the boundary with her finger, her expression a mixture of concern and resolve. "The line is exactly where you said it was," she murmured, 15 feet from that stake. It's not even close. Sarah, a high school history teacher, had a pragmatist's respect for primary sources. She can't just declare your lawn is a common area. Can she? She seems to think she can, Mark said, rubbing the tension from his temples. He felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the same anxiety that preceded a difficult client presentation. She mentioned the HOA's original plat map. Developers sometimes use preliminary maps for marketing that don't reflect the final, legally recorded surveys filed with the county. She's either mistaken or she's deliberately using a faulty document. "And which do you think it is?" Sarah asked, her eyes meeting his. They both knew the answer. Eleanor Vance had been board president for 3 years, a reign defined by a fanatical devotion to the CC&Rs, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions that governed every aspect of life in Oak Creek Preserve. She had fined a family for having a basketball hoop that was a shade of orange, not on the approved spectrum, and forced another to replant their entire front garden because their azaleas were 2 inches taller than the bylaw allowed. Her power was absolute, her interpretation of the rules unassailable, and for some reason, Mark could never quite pinpoint. Her focus always seemed to sharpen when it landed on him. There was a current of personal animosity beneath her procedural obsession, an unexplained grudge that felt older than his residency in the neighborhood. "She's wrong, and I can prove it," Mark said, folding the survey with a decisive snap. "I'll bring this to the next ACC meeting. It's a simple boundary dispute. Once they see the official record, they'll have to drop it." Sarah, his confidant and anchor, placed a hand on his arm. "Just be careful. Mark, you're logical. You believe in facts and evidence. People like Eleanor Vance believe in power. It's not the same thing." Her words were prophetic. Exactly 1 week later, the inciting shot of the war arrived not by email or a note on the door, but via the United States Postal Service, delivered with the solemnity of a legal summons. It was a crisp, letter-sized envelope made of thick, important-feeling paper. In the top left corner was the Oak Creek Preserve HOA logo. Across the front, in bold red letters, were the words "Certified Mail." Mark signed the mail carrier's digital pad, a knot forming in his stomach. Inside, on heavy letterhead, was the formal violation notice. It was a masterpiece of bureaucratic aggression. It stated that a compliance inspection on October 5th had identified an unauthorized obstruction on a designated common area easement. The obstruction was listed as one wooden garden bench and associated plantings. His eyes scanned down the page, landing on the cited authority for the violation, CC&R Federal 8.4.2, Maintenance of Common Area Easements. The notice informed him he had 14 days to cure the violation by removing the encroachment. Failure to comply would result in an initial fine of $100, with further fines of $25 per day to accrue thereafter. He read the specific clause, CC&R were 8.4.2, which the notice had thoughtfully included at the bottom of the page. It stated, "Common area easements are for community utility, access, and enjoyment, and must remain free of any permanent or temporary obstruction placed by a homeowner." It was a perfectly reasonable rule. It was also completely misapplied. The rule was her weapon, but the map was her ammunition, and she was aiming it directly at his grandfather's memory. Mark stood in his hallway, the formal notice in his hand, the certified mail receipt lying on the floor. This was no longer a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate, documented assault. The slow, grinding gears of the HOA's enforcement machinery had been engaged, and they were designed to move in only one direction. The Architectural Control Committee meeting was held in the community center's multi-purpose room, a sterile space that smelled faintly of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. Mark sat at one of the folding tables, his professional-grade survey rolled neatly and secured with a rubber band. His demeanor calm and prepared. He was used to presenting complex plans to skeptical city councils. 3 HOA board members should have been simple. At the head of the room, behind a long table that served as their dais, sat Eleanor and 2 other board members, a nervous-looking man named Frank, who nodded at everything Eleanor said, and a woman named Brenda, who seemed perpetually distracted. Eleanor called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of a small gavel. When his agenda item was called, Mark walked to the front of the room. He unrolled his survey, using magnets to affix it to a whiteboard. It was a beautiful document, a testament to his profession. The lines were clean, the notary seal was crisp, and the surveyor's registration number was clearly visible. "Good evening," he began, his voice steady. "My name is Mark Hollis, from 1214 Chestnut Drive. I'm here to address the violation notice I received regarding an alleged encroachment on a common area easement, as you can see from this official survey, filed and recorded with Montgomery County. My property line extends 15 feet beyond the area in question. The garden bench cited in the notice is, therefore, located entirely on my private lot and does not violate CC&R Section 8.4.2. He pointed to the precise boundary line on the map, then to the easement designation, which was clearly marked on the adjacent actual common area. It was an open and shut case, a simple clerical error on the HOA's part. Eleanor did not look at his survey. Instead, she produced a document of her own from a glossy folder. It was a single sheet, a photocopy of a photocopy. The lines blurry, and the text slightly skewed. She held it up for the others to see, a condescending smile fixed on her face. "Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Hollis," she said, her tone dripping with false patience. "However, the board is guided by the founding documents of this community. This," she announced, tapping a manicured finger on the blurry page, "is the official plat map provided by the original developer. And, as you can see right here, it clearly indicates a 15-foot easement for future community pathways." Mark stepped closer to examine her map. It was exactly as he'd suspected, a preliminary marketing plat, lacking a surveyor's stamp, a recording number, or any of the legal formalities of an official deed. "Eleanor, with all due respect, that's not a legally binding document," he explained calmly. "It's a conceptual drawing. My survey is the final, recorded instrument that legally defines the property boundaries. Your map was superseded the moment the county recorded the final deeds." "Are you suggesting," Eleanor said, her voice turning to ice, "that the HOA has been operating under an illegal map for 30 years? "I'm suggesting it's an outdated one. And there's a simple remedy," Mark countered. "The board should rely on the official county records, not a developer's proposal." Eleanor turned to the other 2 board members. Frank was fidgeting with his pen, avoiding eye contact. Brenda was staring at the plat map as if it were scripture. "The board has always used this map," Eleanor declared, her voice rising with an air of finality. "It is the basis for our understanding of the community's layout. We cannot simply disregard it because one homeowner disagrees. The committee finds that the violation is valid. Mr. Hollis, you have until the end of the compliance period to remove the bench." She banged the gavel. "Next item." Mark stood there for a moment, stunned. It wasn't about facts. It wasn't about evidence. It was about her authority. She had dismissed a legally recorded survey in favor of a 30-year-old piece of marketing material. And the other board members, too intimidated or too indifferent to challenge her, had let her. He rolled up his survey, the crisp paper now feeling like a useless prop. Sarah was right. This wasn't a battle of logic. It was a battle of will, and he had just lost the first skirmish. The fines began to accrue, each notification arriving like a new wound. First, the initial $100 fine, then a bill for $175 for the first week of noncompliance. The certified letters piled up on the hall table, a constant, tangible reminder of the bureaucratic siege he was under. Mark felt a knot of anxiety tighten in his gut every time he checked the mail. The financial pressure was manageable, for now, but the principle of it was galling. He was being fined for occupying his own land. The stress began to fray the edges of their peaceful home life. Conversations with Sarah invariably circled back to Eleanor and the bench. Sleep offered little escape. His dreams filled with endless concrete paths and the sound of a gavel striking wood. He was an architect, a builder, a man who solved problems with logic and precision. But this problem felt different. It was illogical, personal, and maddeningly immune to reason. "We can't just let her do this," he said one evening, pacing the kitchen floor while Sarah prepared dinner. "There has to be a way to fight this." "Maybe we should just move the bench for now," Sarah suggested gently, her voice weary. "Just until we can get this sorted out. The fines are adding up, and a lien is the last thing we need." "No," Mark said, stopping his pacing. "That's what she wants. If I move it, I'm conceding that she's right, that the land is hers to control. It's my grandfather's bench on my grandfather's land. I'm not giving it up." He knew he couldn't win on his own. He needed someone who understood the system not just as it was written, but as it was practiced, its loopholes, its history, its dusty, forgotten corners. He needed an expert. He needed George. George Henderson was a neighborhood legend, a retired county surveyor who had lived in Oak Creek for 40 years. He was a cantankerous but brilliant man who took a perverse delight in procedural justice. He was the one who'd forced the HOA to repaint the community pool house after proving they'd used a shade of white that was 2% off the approved RGB color code in the bylaws. He was a walking encyclopedia of deeds, easements, and county ordinances. Mark found him tending to his prize-winning roses, his back bent with age, but his movements still precise. Mark explained the situation, laying out the violation notice, his survey, and Eleanor's flimsy plat map on the hood of his car. George listened intently, his brow furrowed, pushing his spectacles up the bridge of his nose. He took Mark's survey and held it up to the light, studying it with a practiced eye. "This is a Class A survey, properly recorded and sealed, airtight." He grunted. He then glanced at the photocopy of Eleanor's map and snorted. This is a placemat. Worthless. So, Vance is claiming this old developer's dream is gospel, eh?" "She won't even look at my survey," Mark said in frustration. The board just rubber-stamped her decision. George's eyes lit up with the fire of a long-dormant warrior. "She's hiding something," he said, a grim smile spreading across his face. "Power trippers like Eleanor always have a reason beyond the rules. It's never just about the rules." He handed the documents back to Mark. "I'll help you, but you have to do exactly as I say. This is a paper war. Son, you win it with better paper." Their first stop was the county records office, a hushed, climate-controlled building that smelled of old paper and microfilm. George navigated the archives with the confidence of a librarian in his own study. For days, they sifted through dusty binders and scrolled through digital archives. They pulled the original deeds for Mark's property, the final subdivision plans for all of Oak Creek Preserve, and, crucially, the HOA's own publicly filed documents. The breakthrough came when George requested the official minutes from all HOA board meetings for the past year. The PATH project had to be approved somewhere. He muttered, his finger tracing down a list of meeting dates. Let's see. Here it is. June 12th. Motion to approve funding for Community Pathway Project Phase 1. Passed unanimously. But, as they looked closer, they saw it. Following the vote, a large section of the minutes, under the heading Vendor Selection and Bidding Process, was completely blacked out. A thick, impenetrable block of redaction. Well, now, isn't that interesting? George said, leaning back in his chair. That's not standard procedure. Financial decisions, especially contract awards, are supposed to be transparent to the membership. Why would they redact that? The question hung in the air, thick with suspicion. The blacked-out text was a locked door, and Mark knew with absolute certainty that Eleanor Vance held the key. The fight was no longer just about a bench on a patch of grass. It was about what secrets were hiding in that dark, empty space on the page. George, energized by the scent of bureaucratic malfeasance, became a man possessed. Redacting minutes is what you do when you have something to hide. He declared, now we just have to find out what it is. He spent the next week calling old contacts, digging through online business registries, and leveraging favors from clerks who still remembered him from his surveying days. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. Mark was in his home office, trying to concentrate on a blueprint for a new library. But his mind kept drifting back to the redacted minutes. His phone buzzed, and George's gravelly voice was on the other end, crackling with excitement. I've got it. Mark, I've got it all. They met at their usual spot, the hood of Mark's car parked on the quiet street between their houses. George was holding a small stack of papers, his hands trembling slightly. First, he began, laying down a printout of a business license, the HOA's plat map, just as we thought. It's from the developer's initial proposal package from 1988. It was superseded by the official, recorded surveys in 1990 when the lots were legally created and sold. Legally, it's meaningless. He then laid down a second sheet, a printout of an email. Now for the good part. I called a friend over in the management company that holds the HOA's digital records. I told her I was working on a historical archive of the neighborhood. She gave me temporary access to the backup server. They're supposed to delete drafts, but someone got lazy. He tapped the paper. This is the unredacted draft of the June 12th meeting minutes. Mark leaned over, his heart beginning to beat faster. He read the paragraph that had been blacked out in the official version. Discussion of landscaping bids for the Community Pathway project followed. 3 bids were submitted. Board President Eleanor Vance recommended the board accept the proposal from Prestige Green Landscaping, noting their competitive pricing and familiarity with the community aesthetic. The contract, for $45,000, was awarded to Prestige Green Landscaping by unanimous vote. $45,000 seems steep for a simple concrete path, Mark said. It is, George said, his voice grim. But that's not the punchline. He laid down his final piece of paper, a printout from the state's corporate registry. It was the filing for Prestige Green Landscaping, LLC, under the section for company officers. 2 names were listed. The first was a man named David Miller. The second, listed as the primary registered agent, was a woman named Karen Miller. Karen Miller, George said slowly, savoring the moment, is Eleanor Vance's maiden name. David Miller is her brother-in-law. The pieces clicked into place with the force of a tectonic shift. It was a classic kickback scheme, breathtaking in its simplicity and arrogance. There was no bidding process. Eleanor had steered a grossly inflated, no bid contract to her own family, a clear conflict of interest, and a violation of the HOA's own bylaws regarding financial dealings. The community path wasn't for the community's enjoyment. It was a pretext to funnel $45,000 of the homeowner's money into her brother-in-law's pocket. And the only thing standing in her way was a 15-foot strip of Mark's land and his grandfather's bench. Her entire scheme depended on her ability to seize that land using a fraudulent map. The exhilaration of the discovery was quickly replaced by a cold dread. Eleanor wasn't just a petty tyrant. She was a crook. And now that Mark had the evidence to prove it, he knew she would stop at nothing to silence him. His fears were confirmed 2 days later. Another certified letter arrived. This one was thicker, heavier. Inside, there were 2 documents. The first was a formal hearing notice, summoning him to appear before the full board in 2 weeks' time to present his case or be found in permanent violation. The second document made his blood run cold. It was an intent to lien notice. It stated that his accrued fines, now totaling over $500, were delinquent. If the fines were not paid, and the violation not cured within 30 days of the hearing, the HOA would place a lien on his property. A lien could trigger the acceleration clause in his mortgage, putting his home, his grandfather's house, in immediate jeopardy. This was no longer a squabble over bylaws. Eleanor was threatening to take his home. That evening, Mark was working in his garage when he saw Eleanor's car pull up in front of Mrs. Gable's house next door. Mrs. Gable was in her late 80s, a frail but fiercely independent woman who had lived in her house since the neighborhood was built. She was one of the few who had quietly offered Mark her support, telling him his grandfather was a wonderful man who would be proud of him for standing his ground. Mark watched as Eleanor walked up to Mrs. Gable's door. He couldn't hear their conversation, but he could see the dynamic through the screen door. Eleanor was pointing, her gestures sharp and accusatory, at the trim around Mrs. Gable's windows. The paint was peeling slightly, a minor cosmetic issue on a 50-year-old house. Mrs. Gable stood back, her shoulders slumped, nodding slowly. After a few minutes, Eleanor left, getting back in her car with a satisfied look on her face. Later that night, there was a timid knock on Mark's door. It was Mrs. Gable, a plate of cookies in her trembling hands. "I'm so sorry, Mark," she whispered, her eyes welling with tears. "Eleanor," she said, "my peeling paint is a serious violation. She said she's been letting it slide. But if I cause trouble for the board, she'll have to start fining me. I can't afford it. I'm on a fixed income." She looked at him, her expression full of shame. "She wants me to speak in favor of the path at the annual meeting, to say it's a wonderful improvement for seniors like me." Mark felt a surge of protective anger. This was Eleanor's second obstacle. She wasn't just coming after him with legal threats. She was weaponizing fear, turning his neighbors against him by threatening the most vulnerable among them. He now faced a moral dilemma. He had the evidence to destroy Eleanor's scheme. But if he used it, he could bring the full weight of her vindictive wrath down on Mrs. Gable, and who knew how many other innocent residents. His victory could come at their expense. He took the plate of cookies from her. "Mrs. Gable," he said, his voice soft but firm, "you don't have to do anything. I will handle this. I promise. She will not bother you again." As he closed the door, he knew the final confrontation had to be public. It had to be decisive. And it had to protect not just his own property, but his entire community from the cancer of Eleanor's corruption. The HOA annual meeting was in 1 week. It would be his stage. The air in the Oak Creek Preserve Community Center was thick with anticipation and the scent of burnt coffee. Every seat was filled, with dozens of homeowners standing along the back and side walls. The annual meeting, usually a sparsely attended affair for approving the budget, had become the most anticipated event of the year. Word of Mark's dispute and the mysterious pathway project had spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. People were worried about their property values, their rising dues, and the increasingly autocratic rule of their board president. At the front of the room, Eleanor Vance sat at the center of the long table, flanked by the other board members. She looked composed, regal, a queen presiding over her court. A large projector screen hung behind her, currently displaying the HOA logo. Beside the screen, a digital countdown timer had been set to 05:00. This was a new addition, a tool of intimidation. During the public comment period, each speaker would have exactly 5 minutes, not a second more. Mark sat in the front row, a slim laptop on his knees, his heart a steady, rhythmic drum against his ribs. He was not a litigator or a public speaker, but he was an architect. He knew how to build a case, how to lay a foundation, and construct an argument brick by brick until it was unassailable. Sarah sat beside him, her hand resting reassuringly on his arm. When the public comment period began, Eleanor called his name. Mr. Mark Hollis, you have 5 minutes. The timer started its relentless descent, 4:59, 4:58. Mark walked to the podium and connected his laptop to the projector. The HOA logo was replaced by his first slide. His voice, when he spoke, was calm and measured, amplified by the microphone. Good evening. My name is Mark Hollis, and I live at 1214 Chestnut Drive. Many of you are aware that I am in a dispute with the board over a violation notice. I'm here tonight to present the facts of the case, so that you, the members of this association, can understand the full picture. Slide 1. CCNR, we 8.4.2. The text of the bylaw appeared on screen. Common area easements are for community utility, access, and enjoyment, and must remain free of any permanent or temporary obstruction. This is the rule I am accused of violating, Mark said. It is a sound rule, intended to keep our shared spaces clear. The board, led by President Vance, claims my grandfather's bench is on such an easement. The timer clicked past 4:30. Slide 2. The violation notice. A high-resolution scan of the formal notice appeared, the red certified mail stamp clearly visible. This is the notice I received, citing the rule you just saw. It claims my bench is an obstruction. The board's entire case rests on a single premise that the land it sits on is a common area easement. The timer hit 3:45. He was building his foundation. Slide 3. Survey versus plat map. The screen split into two. On the left was his official, sealed county survey, with his property line highlighted in yellow. On the right was the blurry, unofficial plat map Eleanor had used, with her claimed easement highlighted in red. The discrepancy was stark and undeniable. This is the core of the disagreement. On the left is the legally recorded survey for my property. On the right is the 30-year-old developer's map the board is using. As you can see, they do not match. Only one of these is a legal document. It is the one on the left. This alone proves the violation is invalid. But I've come to learn this was never about a bench or an easement. A murmur went through the crowd. Eleanor shifted in her seat, her knuckles white where she gripped her pen. The timer showed 2:50. This is about a $45,000 contract for a community pathway project that this board approved on June 12th, which brings me to my next exhibit. Slide 4. The redacted minutes. The official, blacked-out minutes appeared on screen. These are the minutes from that meeting. As you can see, the entire section on vendor selection has been redacted. This is not transparency. So I did some digging to find out what the board was hiding. The timer read 1:30. The room was silent. Eleanor's eyes were fixed on the screen, a flicker of panic finally breaking through her icy composure. "And this," Mark said, his voice ringing with conviction as he clicked to his final slide, "is what was beneath that black box." Slide 5. The unredacted truth. The screen split again. On the left, the redacted minutes. On the right, the unredacted draft. Mark had highlighted the key phrases in bright yellow contract, awarded to Prestige Green Landscaping. The amount, $45,000, and the name of the company's registered agent, Karen Miller. Prestige Green Landscaping, a company whose registered agent is Karen Miller, which is our board president's maiden name, Mark announced, his voice booming through the silent room. The lucrative, no-bid contract for this project was awarded to Eleanor Vance's brother-in-law. This isn't a community improvement project. It's a conflict of interest, a breach of fiduciary duty, and a scheme to defraud every homeowner in this room by using our dues to enrich her own family. The timer showed 0:45. Gasps and angry shouts erupted from the audience. The board members looked at Eleanor in shock and betrayal. Her face had drained of all color. Mark held up a hand for silence. "Before my time runs out, I want to address one more thing. I know some of our neighbors feel pressured to overlook things for fear of retaliation over minor issues, like the color of their mailbox or peeling paint on a windowsill." He looked directly at Mrs. Gable, who was watching him with tears in her eyes. That is not what a community is about. So I propose that as a part of restoring integrity to this board, we vote on a clean slate amnesty for all non-safety-related aesthetic violations older than 1 year. We need to be neighbors, not inspectors. The timer beeped, its screen flashing 000. Mark stepped back from the podium. The room, which had been simmering with anger, exploded into a roar of applause. He had done more than just defend his property. He had defended them all. The aftermath was swift and decisive. The eruption of homeowner outrage could not be contained. People were on their feet, shouting questions, demanding answers. Frank, the nervous board member, was the first to break. He shakily made a motion to immediately suspend all work on the Community Pathway project, pending a full investigation. Brenda, her face pale, seconded it instantly. The vote was 2-0, with Eleanor abstaining, her silence a confession. A second motion followed, proposed by a homeowner from the floor, to freeze all of President Vance's executive powers and to hire an independent forensic accountant to conduct a top-to-bottom audit of the HOA's finances for the past 3 years. It passed with a thunderous chorus of ayes. A third motion, made by a visibly shaken Brenda, was to immediately rescind all fines and nullify the intent to lien notice against Mark Hollis. It, too, passed unanimously. Eleanor Vance sat stone-faced through it all, a statue of crumbling authority. When the meeting was chaotically adjourned, she gathered her papers with trembling hands and walked out of the community center without a word, a phalanx of angry questions following her into the parking lot. She did not look back. Mark was surrounded, hands clapping his back, strangers shaking his hand. "Thank you," they said, one after another. "Thank you for standing up to her." He found Sarah in the crowd, and she wrapped her arms around him, her face buried in his shoulder. "You did it," she whispered. "You really did it." Driving home, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a profound sense of exhaustion and relief. They pulled into the driveway and sat for a moment in the quiet of the car. the headlights illuminating the sturdy oak tree and the simple, perfect bench that sat beneath it. It was still there. He had won. In the weeks that followed, the community began to heal. Eleanor Vance submitted her resignation via a curt email the next morning. The audit confirmed everything Mark had uncovered, revealing that nearly a quarter of the association's reserve funds had been earmarked or spent on the fraudulent project. The board, under new leadership, immediately adopted a new transparency bylaw that Mark himself had drafted, requiring multiple bids for any project over $5,000 and mandating that all financial decisions be published in full for the membership to review. The clean slate amnesty passed, and a collective sigh of relief seemed to pass through the neighborhood as years of petty violations were wiped away. One cool autumn evening, a few months later, Mark and Sarah were sitting on the grandfather's bench, a warm blanket spread over their laps. The air was crisp, and the leaves of the pin oak above them were turning brilliant shades of red and gold. The wooden stake was long gone, the grass having healed over the scar it left behind. Sarah was quiet for a long time before she spoke, her voice distant. "You know, I just remembered something from high school. It's so strange." "What is it?" Mark asked. "Eleanor Vance," she said. She didn't go by Vance then. Her maiden name was Miller, Karen Miller. "The name from the corporate filing." Mark nodded. "Right. Her brother-in-law's company." "No, it's not just that," Sarah continued, sitting up a little straighter. "She was in our graduating class. Don't you remember she was in all the advanced art and design classes with you? She was good, too. Really competitive." Mark searched his memory, a vague image of a quiet, intense girl with dark hair coming into focus. He hadn't thought of her in over 20 years. "She was always second place," Sarah said, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place with breathtaking clarity. "Every art show, every design competition, you always just edged her out. And senior year, the Ashton Architectural Scholarship, the big one. Full ride to the State University's architecture program. You both were the finalists." Mark stared at her, the memory flooding back. Winning that scholarship had set the course for his entire life. He remembered the ceremony, the handshake, the flash of a camera. He didn't remember who the other finalist was. "She wanted it so badly," Sarah said softly. "I remember she told me once that her family couldn't afford to send her otherwise. After you won, she ended up going to community college. I don't think she ever finished her degree." Mark looked out across the lawn, at the perfect, unbroken green stretching out before him. The fight hadn't just been about a kickback scheme. It hadn't just been about seizing land for a project. It had been the culmination of a 20-year-old grudge, a deep and bitter resentment that had festered in the heart of a woman who believed he had stolen her future. The bench wasn't just an obstruction to a path. It was a symbol of the legacy he had built, a life she felt should have been hers. The entire ordeal, the weaponized bylaws, the public humiliation, the threat to his home, it was all a petty, long-delayed act of revenge for a high school scholarship. He had never even known he was her rival. Yet, to her, he had always been the enemy. He reached out and took Sarah's hand, his fingers tracing the familiar lines of her palm. He looked at the house his grandfather had built, the bench he had sat on, the life he had made. He had won, but the true nature of the victory left a bitter taste in his mouth. He had fought a battle of logic and law against an enemy motivated by something far older and more irrational, a ghost from the past he never even knew was there.